Welcome back to the DrupalEasy podcast. This is season 16, episode 5. My name is Mike Anello, and in today's episode, we'll be talking about the Drupal Recipes Initiative with Jim Birch, one of its organizers. Before we get to the interview, let me tell you about one of DrupalEasy's long-form training courses. Now, if you listen to this podcast, then you've probably heard me mention once or twice our long-form beginner-focused Drupal training course called Drupal Career Online. The course is designed to lay a rock-solid foundation for becoming a professional Drupal developer, and it gets you access to the DrupalEasy learning community. Among the benefits of this are access to our weekly office hours, community mentors, as well as all of our curriculum updates. Class meets twice a week for 12 weeks starting February 12th. Learn more at drupaleasy.com/DCO. Welcome, Jim Birch, I believe back to the DrupalEasy podcast. I don't have it off the top of my head when you were here, but I'm pretty sure we've had you on before, sometime in the last dozen years.
Yeah, you've been doing it a while.
So you've been part of Drupal for over 10 years. You're currently engineering manager. Is that your title at Canopy?
That is my title, yes.
What does that mean? What are you in charge of? You're in charge of engineering, like Scotty?
I am in charge of a wonderful crew of Drupal developers on the build team. So we do large-scale Drupal builds, usually migrations from Drupal 7 and other odd CMSs into modern Drupal. Yeah, so I get to lead some projects every once in a while, but primarily I lead the leaders of the builds.
Herding cats, as they say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful cats.
And you are one of the contributors to the Recipes Strategic Initiative, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's start there and explain to me what is a recipe in Drupal context. But you got to do it fast. Like I'm gonna count you down for like 30 seconds. Go.
Sure. Okay, so a Drupal recipe is a way to apply functionality to your Drupal instance that is ephemeral, meaning you're not tied to it anymore after it's applied, not installed. And it's a way that Dries introduced in DrupalCon Portland 2 years ago as having starter templates for the ambitious site builder. So, imagine being able to install a calendar with every little bit that you needed to have events on a calendar.
And the nice thing about these recipes, and I'm just going to pile on to what you're saying, is you could add said calendar recipe to an existing site. That's the goal.
Correct. Yeah. So with other things like installation profiles and distributions, you are often tied to that starter point and never could you escape it. Whereas, recipes are meant to be, completely ephemeral. And, once you install that calendar recipe, you could install a blog recipe after that.
Yeah, distributions are great for the first 10 minutes. And then they're horrible. And that's my opinion, but I think it's a fairly common opinion.
Well, I think we'll talk about why does the strategic initiative have distributions in its name? Because it was born of the same world. So we do know that there is a place for distributions. There are a lot of really cool distributions like Thunder and Open Social, that definitely have a need. We don't foresee recipes replacing distributions, but being a tool in the toolkit. So there's going to be some things in a distribution where they want to give this functionality to the site owner, and it is the site owner's responsibility. So they don't have to ever update features or, continue to update the custom modules that are in there that update config.
Yeah, these distributions, it's a tremendous amount of work for the folks who maintain distributions.
Yeah.
So, and hopefully Recipes is going to kind of be a nice alternative to that. I think for the initiative, you can keep the name the same, keep distributions in the official name of the initiative, but just put a strike through the word distributions.
There you go. Yeah. So, we've reached out to the pain points of distribution maintainers. We've been asked if there are a lot of distribution maintainers contributing to the initiative, but really, I think they're really busy maintaining their distributions the way they are. So, if they're ever coming out with a 3.0 or a 4.0, this might be a good tool for them to look at.
What's the Greek character that's always pushing the stone up the hill.
Mm,
Oh, I forget what, but that's what I feel like a distribution maintainer is.
sure.
They're never getting to the top. It's
Yeah.
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 All right. Well, let's talk about recipes here. We're going to forget about distributions for now. Let's talk about recipes. So, what are they? I mean, just if I were to imagine what a recipe might be, it would be, just a pile of configuration. Basically, like let's take your calendar example. If I wanted to add a calendar to an existing site, I'll probably need at least one module. I'll need maybe a view. I'll need maybe some theming on that as well. So maybe that's part of another module that I have to add. So it feels to me like recipes are mainly configuration. Now, am I off or
Mainlys are exclusively configuration.
exclusively? Okay.
Yes, recipes do not contain any code. So if you do need to require code for your recipe, you would need to require a module or a theme that would provide that code. Recipes can require other recipes. So you can stack recipes that says do this first and then go do this other recipe. But yeah, to get back to your example, think of everything that you have to click together and compose or require to get into that calendar to be done, and that's what a recipe can provide.
So I saw a presentation recently from, let's see, Eric Volkernick, I think is how you
Yep.
pronounce his last name, at NetCamp on recipes, which kind of inspired me to reach out to you for this. And he said that a recipe can specify which of a module's configuration actually gets imported when that recipe is installed.
Correct.
So maybe talk about that a little bit more and maybe an example, because I think I understand, but you could probably, explain it a bit more than I could.
Sure. So when you enable a module using the Drupal admin or Drush, it automatically imports the configuration that's in the /config folder, and the subfolders install optional override. Which, when a recipe enables a module, it does not do that by default. So you would have to specify if you want to import all of the config. So you could just say, I'm enabling, the field UI module, and then give me all the config that comes with the field UI module. Terrible example because field UI probably has no config. But you could say, specify just which configs you want to
Okay.
import after you enable the module. So a meta tag is a good example. Meta tag comes with 6 meta tag defaults and a meta tag.settings config file. If I didn't want all of those defaults, if I didn't want the 404 and 403 meta tags, I could just specify the 4 meta tag configs I want to import.
So maybe we should take a quick step back, because it sounds like recipes are nothing more than, or let me be precise about this. A recipe is a single YAML file. Is that right?
The YAML file is the only thing in a recipe project that is required.
So what else could there be that's not required?
There could be a config folder.
Oh, so the recipe itself could have some config that isn't necessarily tied with one of the dependencies of that recipe.
Correct. So
Okay.
in our calendar example, we would want to create an event content type,
Okay. Got it.
and that would require a content type config, entity view display, and an entity form, the fields that go on that. So a field storage and a field. So that's where you're creating new configuration.
But then there would still have to be, if you want it to be themed, or if you wanted to just apply layout, or just even just the basic, CSS to it, you would still need to do that in another module. So it would kind of make sense that that other module would probably contain the config for the content type and stuff like that.
Yes. So what you are talking about has been referred to as recipeception. So yes, where do all of these things live? Could be, yeah. So in a module, you could do a hook that says, "Look over here for the templates," and with that, the library that comes along with it, or single directory components. So yeah, you could provide additional theming, templates that kind of work in a custom module that your recipe requires.
So we should say, and we'll talk about this in a moment as well, but this is very early days for recipes. This is nothing's in core yet. This is not done. This is like being actively developed as we speak.
Definitely. The benefit, so yeah, all of the work is being done is in a Drupal project, as is with a lot of modern distributions, which this project is a complete fork of Drupal core. It's not like a experimental module that is enabled. It is going to be part of Drupal core. There's a patch created from this, which you can apply to anything above Drupal 9. We support the last minor version of Drupal, so we're just supporting Drupal 10.1 and above. But you can apply this patch to your local Drupal, and then you can do everything recipes can. And you don't even need to deploy this patch core to your environment because you're applying your Drupal recipe, in your development environment, and then you export config and everything is yours
Oh,
anyways.
okay. That's interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it is very experimental, but it's very easy to develop locally and not ever touch your production environment with any experimental code.
Oh, okay. And that's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. So yeah, all right, that's kind of cool. Yeah, so you could totally develop using a recipe today on your local with this patch on core. And then, as you said, export the configuration and then import that configuration into just a regular unpatched version of Drupal core.
Yep.
All right. So the thing that really blew my mind watching this presentation at NetCamp was the ability for recipes to alter existing configuration. And
That is where the magic happens.
you say magic, I like that just seems difficult and scary for me. The phrase that was used was config actions. So you can apply some action to config. And I looked it up, and there's a module called config actions, but we were talking before the podcast. And you said that recipes isn't actually using that module, it's using its own code that was inspired by that module. So kind of talk about that, talk about what config actions does, and maybe an example of where a recipe might want to alter existing configuration.
Sure.
I
So
think there's like 17 questions in there, so good luck.
yeah, no worries. With a custom module, you could do the three things I mentioned earlier to config. You could import it. That is, if it doesn't exist, you can import it. If it did exist, it would fail. You can put in an optional folder in your config folder, which would say, mainly used for if you have, let's say, the help module or the tour module, and you could put extra config in there that would be imported if you have those things. And then there's the config override folder, which says, look out world, I don't care what you have on your site. I am just going to erase it and import my config. What you could never do was, say, alter existing configuration, alter somebody else's config like Drupal cores. So the config actions API is meant to hook into existing configuration. And then basically, there's a few different ways that you can alter the configuration. So you can just do a simple config, let's call it simple config update. So that's kind of like a foo bar. So let's go into the node.settings configuration and set the use admin theme to true. Go into the user.settings and set the register for Drupal to admin only. So you can go in, to me, it's like the first 4 hours of every Drupal site. I will go in and click all the things that I don't want set up, no matter if I install with a minimal profile or a standard profile. But you can do really cool things like set the admin theme to Gin and the front end theme to Olivero. And then even then in Gin's admin theme settings, you could go in and set it to dark mode and you set the different colors and, do a lot of things. So that's the basic config action. There is another one called ensure exists. This is kind of mysterious one to us still, but to check validation on a configuration. So this is how we might be able to work around optional. So if user role exists, do this to it.
Right. Or if a content type exists or a vocabulary exists. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I have it on my list to play with that a little bit more today. There are a couple entity methods. So grant permissions is one.
Oh, okay.
So, as you're adding functionality and you have user roles, you'll want to definitely check boxes on the permission page. And that grant permissions action is one of those. There's set filter config, which goes into CK editor and does a few things.
So all of this seems like something that as a developer who is applying a recipe, or I don't know what the right verb is going to be, when you take a recipe and add it to your site,
Apply is correct.
I would want to know, like, like I can kind of almost tolerate the fact that there's going to be some config imported, right? There's going to be some new config because that's kind of my expectation. I'm adding a calendar recipe. I better freaking have an event content type or something like that I expect. But I think I would also expect that if that recipe is going to mess with existing config, I'd like to know about it and be able to say, okay, proceed. Or, whoa, stop, I don't want to do this yet. Is it safe to assume there's going to be some type of are you sure step in there?
There is an issue for it that we've created.
Early days, I get it. I'm just kind
Yeah.
of thinking out loud as I if I were to apply one, like what would my expectation be?
So you, as a worldly Drupal developer, may want this, but I'm not sure an ambitious site builder would know or care about this.
Well, that's true. Okay.
You could, you know, look at the the recipe file and see exactly what you will get a git diff before you push
That's
to
true. Okay.
your local. But we do have the idea of prompts for like something like a language. So like we're installing, something that gets into the translation system of Drupal, and maybe a prompt like what languages do you want to install with this recipe?
So you didn't mention anything about like configuration getting deleted though, right?
Correct. I don't know. I don't know if configuration can be deleted by a recipe.
Yeah, because that could potentially destroy data.
Yes.
Yeah, so that seems like that you have to be very careful about that.
So that brings up a really good segue into what the backend team of the recipes initiative is working on is configuration validation. So while the configuration management system in Drupal core is amazing, the guys figured out that none of it's validated. So you could import configuration that just does nothing into your Drupal instance, or could break something. The configuration isn't ever validated. So that's what they're working on right now to help ensure that, yeah, you're not going to do bad things when you import a recipe.
But where does config schema fit into all that? Because that's kind of validated.
It is. Config schema defines what the fields are, but nothing's validated in it, to my understanding. So yeah, there's a tag called configuration validation in the Drupal core issue queue where there's a ton of work going on right now. They're making great
I've
progress.
seen some of that going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thankless job right there.
It totally is, and it's kind of like the groundwork that needs to happen to ensure that recipes, if it fails halfway during an install,
Yeah, what do you do?
Doesn't totally bork your site, which is something Wim Leers and Fenna Proxima and Alex Pott have been working on the past month, and just seeing these issues go by, and we've gotten to a point now where yes, if a recipe fails to apply, it will just revert back to zero of your site. So they're doing something called config snapshots, which is going to take a picture of your config before you apply the recipe and after you apply a recipe.
Isn't this? I mean, this is fantastic though, because you think about like all the work that went into Drupal's configuration system between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, and now we're kind of just building on top of that in a way that we didn't even couldn't even think of 5 years ago.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty freaking cool if you ask me.
Yeah, and it's not configuration 2.0. It is just iterative steps on just making it better and safer.
Who knew that we were going to be talking about configuration for the bulk of this pod? I guess you probably figured we would be, but all right. So I know you're not going to give me an answer or a specific answer, but maybe just a general, very very hand wavy answer. What timeline are we looking for? Is there like, are we thinking maybe Drupal 11 will have an experimental module? And these are my words, not yours. So I'm just
Sure.
throwing something out there.
It will never be an experimental module.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned that. Yeah,
Yeah, because it is. I mean, it is like I
baked
don't
in.
know, baked into Drupal core. So
Okay.
yeah, because that. Yes, I decline to answer that question at this time. My suspicion would be 11.1, 11.2,
Okay.
but yeah, it depends on how much contribution we can get. Right now, it's a very
Yeah.
small team that works
Right.
on this initiative.
I would also say, I will put these words in your mouth. You don't know what you don't know,
Correct.
right? More things could come up.
Yeah, so that's why it's great for experimentation right now. I am definitely not a backend developer. I'm,
Hmm.
like you said earlier, I'm more the manager of people now, but I am definitely a recipe creator. And as I create recipes, I find things that I go back to the backend team and say, "Hey, what about this? Hey, what about that?" Going on podcasts like this and talking at conferences, people ask really great questions. You can see them process the information and come up with ways that they would use it. So like come up with, I put proof of concept issues in the issue queue. Hey, can we do this? I was on another podcast a month ago or two ago, and somebody asked, does it work with the new Drupal starter theme? So, we talked about a scenario how that would work. Whereas you have a theme, you require a theme, and then you clone the theme using that method, and then you get rid of the original theme. So, I mean, it's a cool process. I haven't worked all the way through it, but I could see
Yeah.
how it would be a cool thing. Like, yeah, let's clone, Olivero and use the Drupal
Yeah.
starter theme functionality to clone it into your own theme, and then you don't need Olivero after that. So how do we get rid of it?
Let's talk about it a little bit. If someone wanted to play with this today, kind of like the way you're talking about it, is creating a recipe and just playing with it. It sounds like the steps would be, get a fresh copy of Drupal on your local, apply the core patch. Links to all this stuff will be in the show notes. Apply the core patch. I don't. I'm going to say, go on a limb. There's probably no documentation yet for this stuff. You probably just have to look at existing recipes somewhere in the issue queue.
There is a linked from the project page. There is a 1.x branch in our repository that has documentation that is ever evolving. Linked to from the project page is I created a cookbook of existing recipes
Oh, okay.
where basically I just link to, I think it's broken out into like site starters, which is what every agency wants. I want to save that 4 hours at the beginning of every project. So there's three of those. I'm starting to deal with a lot of micro recipes. So I love the idea of having an off the shelf recipe that I can grab that adds you know the Gin admin experience to a site, which is, to me, it's the Gin theme, the Gin login module, the Gin toolbar module. So there's more than just the theme. There's a couple modules in there. Setting a password policy. So I have one that sets up a 90-day password policy that says you must change your password every 90 days and it can't be one of the last 12. So, something that our support team gets asked all the time. If I could narrow that down from 3 hours a task to 30 minutes, that would save our clients a bunch of money. And
But aren't you, by doing that? And I'm not picking on you by any stretch, but I'm just saying, like, in order to do that, like you said, the Gin admin experience, we'll call it.
yeah,
It sound well. Correct me if I'm wrong. Would all of that be wrapped up into a single recipe? I was just, for some reason in my head, I was thinking you're moving the work of maintaining a distribution from maintaining a distribution to maintaining a recipe, but you're not really. you don't really have to maintain that recipe because it's a one and done when someone applies it.
Yeah, so if I do update that recipe, I don't have to worry about breaking the 200 sites that used it before.
Right, 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 right. All right, so let's say someone builds their own recipe or grabs one of the ones from the links you're talking about. How do they apply it?
So there is a core shell script in
Oh,
Drupal.
okay. Old school.
Yes. So this is, it's at var core PHP Drupal, I think is the location. And that runs the recipe runner that is in core and applies the recipe. So recipes are set up like your modules and themes folder. So you have, where you have slash modules, you'd have slash recipes. In that, the idea of you have a core and contrib.
Contributing custom.
Yeah, contrib and custom folders in that. So yeah, you just run this script and say where the recipe is and apply it. With local recipes, you have to make sure you maintain all of your dependencies. We have some commands and some documentation to help you use contributed recipes from other repositories that have composer.json files. Because I have to host the Gin admin theme, I need to require the Gin admin theme and the Gin login and the Gin toolbar modules. So I have that in a package that can be installed using Composer. The next cool tool is a module called, or a package, a Composer installer package called Drupal Recipe Unpack. So if you have required a recipe using Composer and you have those dependencies now, that because you installed it using Composer, Drupal Recipe Unpack takes the dependencies and unpacks it to your project's composer.json file. So it would take the Gin login, the Gin theme, and the Gin toolbar dependencies and put them in your site's composer.json
Oh, so we'll literally insert those in the require section.
of
Oh, okay.
your site. So yeah, literally,
That's kind of what you want because that now you own the puppy and you have to maintain those modules.
yes.
Okay, so you're not relying on the recipe to maintain the modules.
Yeah. So it is a little sticky right now to get this all set up, but there is a issue to put that into the recipe package into the core project. Yeah,
So there's a roadmap.
there is.
Is that roadmap still accurate? Is it up to date? And it's okay to say no. I'm just curious.
It probably needs some review.
Okay, fair enough.
The biggest, we've taken some detours with this config management because you don't know what you don't know when you make
Right.
roadmaps at the beginning, or sorry, config validation. The biggest thing to getting to a release is that the idea of being able to import content with your recipe.
Oh, okay.
So not just configuration YAML files, but the idea that you could put content YAML files along with those. So once you created your event content type and your event content type fields, we need a way to populate the content, because definitely like populate the taxonomies that your filters need, if you have a filtered view or a filtered calendar. That's kind of like the last big hurdle that nobody's looked at yet, that it would be needed for an ambitious site builder to install these things.
So is that going to build upon an existing contrib module, or is that going to be all new or unknown at this point?
The idea, the current running plan, is that it would be really cool if the default content contrib module would would be moved into core and we could use that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because I think still core initiatives, core projects can't require something that's in contrib,
Right.
so that would need to be in core also. But yeah, that's the last big hurdle on the roadmap to getting it into core.
So let's talk even further down the line, because I think when people think about recipes and the ambitious site builder, it would be great if there was a place you could go and browse recipes and click a button and have that recipe automatically install, which is pretty much what Project Browser is going to bring to Drupal for projects, for modules and base themes and things like that. And it's on the roadmap.
It is.
It's phase 3 on the roadmap. So I mean that's a ways out. I'm sure there's no work happening on that yet, but is that kind of the end point as far as we know? Like, is that like the ultimate goal at this point?
Absolutely. And we actually saw a demo yesterday that Adam Fenneproxima made where he created a project browser plugin that said, look at this folder and find this recipe, and was able to do a pretty quick and dirty proof of concept
Oh, that's exciting.
with the project browser. Yeah. So
Yeah.
definitely a lot of things need to happen. Project Browser, the way they did build the endpoint plugins, is amazing that it is expandable like that. To do that, we would need to have a new project type on Drupal.org called recipe. We would need to update Composer, Drupal scaffold, and Composer installers to have a Drupal recipes type. Right now, we're doing that all by hand thanks to the Oomph Inc. plugin, Composer plugin. So yeah, it's not trivial that that happens, but it is 100% doable. Yeah, so that would be a really cool way for ambitious site builders to discover existing recipes that could, just one click and install,
Yeah.
and bang, you got your calendar and plug in, and you didn't have to pay for it or didn't break your site.
So, all right, let's wrap this up. If folks are interested and want to learn more or even help out, give me like 2 or 3 places that they can go.
Sure. So the most discussion happens in the Drupal Slack. It is the distribution and recipes channel. We meet every other week on Tuesdays where we have an asynchronous meeting, so you don't have to necessarily be there on time, but we create topics to discuss and put in links. There's the distribution and recipes project where we have an issue queue, and reach out to me. We have definitely have skill level, or we have something for every skill level. So we have documentation tasks for writers, and we have a lot of proof of concept and recipe creation issues or tasks for site builders and YAML creators, and then there's a lot of back end issues too.
Is there one good place where people can go to get started and basically says, download Drupal core, apply this patch using, this, and then do that? Like, is there a place people can go to like run those 3 or 4 steps and be able to see something?
Yeah, I have a task to wrap up a getting started document, but that is or will be linked to from the project page.
All right, perfect.
So yeah, go into the distribution and recipes project page is probably the best starting point.
All right, all these links will be in the show notes. Jim, always great catching up with you. Yeah, sure. Thank you for all your hard work and everyone on the team. It's a pretty good team
It is.
from what I've seen. So I'm sure you'll find success soon enough.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to leave you with, like contributing to these initiatives, it's kind of like, if you've ever gone to a Drupal camp or a Drupal meetup, and, if you go once, everybody's super nice. If you go twice, you're going to get invited to the hosting committee or something like that.
Exactly.
If you show up to that, you're a lifer. you know, so at DrupalCon Pittsburgh, I gave my presentation where you're at. I got to say I don't know, and I'll have to get back to you a lot in that because of all the great questions. But we had a table in the contribute room, maybe 6 people there consistently working on a lot of just getting it set up. Alex Pott, the maintainer at the time, wrote all the code for this, or the base code, was on sabbatical. So, it's kind of like a bunch of site builders trying to figure out back end code and how to make this all work. And, we contributed every day of DrupalCon Pittsburgh for 4 hours or so. And by the end of it, we got one issue committed. This was a config action called set component. This is like how you'd add a field to an existing content type. Took us a lot. We updated a lot of documentation, but instead of Project Browser probably finished 100 issues in that time. But we contributed one issue to the effort.
Yeah, but if it's mainly new contributors, I mean, that's that's pretty typical, right? It takes a while to get everybody ramped up and
Yeah.
just comfortable with this, with what's there.
And it was great because this one issue, added a whole nother config action. So we added 25% to the config actions effort. We got a bunch of long-term committers and
Yeah,
initiative
great.
efforts. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, any help definitely helps. Any insight definitely helps. Like, what would you use it for? I get a ton of great questions every time I talk about it. So yeah, if you're interested, please come on out.
All right, cool. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the DrupalEasy podcast. Don't forget to check out all of our long-form Drupal training courses at DrupalEasy.com and stay tuned for the next episode of the DrupalEasy podcast. See ya!